You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protein Machining, and this week I am joined by Doug Funfsinn of Fraisa. So welcome.
Thank you.
So Doug, before we jump into how you got to where you are now, what does Fraisa do? What do you do for Fraisa? All the good stuff. And where can people find you online?
Sure. So Fraisa is a Swiss-based company. A lot of people outside of especially the Midwest here, a lot of people haven't really heard of us. We don't have a huge United States presence. We are a producer primarily of solid carbide milling tools, but we do offer drills and some indexables as well. But our primary focus is high-end, high-quality solid carbide end mills. We've been around since 1934,
Wow.
back in the high-speed steel days. I believe we were one of the first, or if not the first, to put PVD coatings on high-speed steel tools. And we're located in Switzerland in the watchmaking industry, so that's kind of where we started. Micro tooling and all of that. So we have Rolex and Patek Philippe and all them right by our facility, and they're big customers of ours. So that's where we started, and then we obviously have branched out from there to cover as many industries as we possibly can. So what I do for Fraisa, currently my title is the Chief Technical Officer. So I am in charge of Fraisa USA division, just with making decisions on what tools we produce in inch sizes here to cover the American market. We have the Fraisa Tool School, or Tool Lab, I should say, here in Minneapolis, where we have our Hermle machine. So I run a lot of demos and test cuts, things like that. And then I also have Hypermill, Mastercam, and Esprit. So I do a lot of customer support, writing small programs for people to really show them how to utilize a Fraisa tool in the best possible manner. So yeah, that's mostly
Cool.
what I do.
And you mentioned the Tool Lab, your Fraisa _Tool Lab on Instagram. So anybody who's listening,
yes.
Go pull that up. You can see some of these demos he's talking about. I think that's actually the first Fraisa account that I followed. I saw some of your demos pop up. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool.
Yeah, I try to, anything I do day to day, I try to put on there on Instagram. Some of the more, formal videos we put on the Fraisa or Fraisa USA YouTube page. The Fraisa YouTube page, that's all videos coming out of Switzerland. So they have a much larger facility there. They have what they call the tool school, where they have 5 or 6 machines there. Plus they have their R&D lab with another 4 or 5 machines there. So they're cutting all the time. They have a full team of R&D engineers doing that. So they put out some pretty impressive videos on all different material types.
That's great. So yeah, head over there and watch those videos too if you're listening. Well, let's get into your backstory. How did you get to be where you are now?
So, starting off, right after kind of high school, I guess, went down the path of wanting to, become a mechanical engineer. That's what my dad was, and I was interested in all of that kind of stuff. And so I did a year of that, and really wanted to be more hands-on with things. Really, just wanted to actually make something. So at that point in time, I was living in St. Louis, and there's a very good technical college there called Rankin Technical College. And they had an open house, and I figured, well, check it out. Let's just see what they've got going on, and walk through their precision machining technologies section. And my mind was just kind of blown. Like I knew nothing about anything leading up to that, and just started seeing these parts being made and just thought it was really cool. So I enrolled that next semester, did really well there, and just really enjoyed that experience that they provided. And while I was there, I got a job at an aerospace company in St. Louis. So I was doing a little bit of programming, operating of 5-axis mills, some Mitsubishis and Makinos. So I had about 3 or 4 years experience there, and then found a really good company locally that was a tool and die shop, the Cellar Tool and Die down in St. Louis, and they brought me in, and I was there for about 6 years or so doing programming for all their dies. They do all the design work in house, and then we produce everything there. And that's where I was introduced to Fraisa. Cellar is actually one of Fraisa USA's bigger customers, so I had a lot of knowledge on the line. I knew our sales guys, or the sales guy in particular there. I knew that he was very technical, very helpful, and not overly salesy, where he would come in and try to just push stuff on us and all of that. And I like that approach. And then actually, while I was working there, my fiance at the time, she got into veterinary school up here in Minnesota, so we packed our bags and moved up here. And I found out that the Fraisa headquarters is right here, close to where we were moving to, anyways. So I stopped in and told them my experience with the tools, and I was hired here at Fraisa. That was about 10 years ago now. So I first started off at Fraisa for about 5 years doing tool grinding, which is something I had never done before. So that was very interesting. I think that that's something that a lot of machinists don't fully comprehend, what it takes to actually grind a tool, get it coated, all of the processes that go into creating these end mills. So it was eye opening for me, for sure. You in a machine shop, you get them in their tube, and it's kind of just like it shows up like that, and yeah,
Right.
put it in
Yeah.
a
Well,
machine and off you go.
there's a big disconnect in the industry between cutter
Absolutely.
grinders and machinists, both on both ends. I'm not sure that all cutter grinders have ever spent a lot of time machining parts either. I think maybe, I mean,
That
clearly you have, but I don't know if that's the exception or the rule.
that's actually a spot on that, and that's what kind of helped me in my job, because all of the or most of the tool grinders that we had, they went to tech school and whatever, but then they pretty quickly got a job at a grind shop because they had an opening. So very little actual machining knowledge. So we produce custom tooling here a lot. So we need to make sure that the custom tool actually works for whatever material type or application they're doing, so I can help kind of bridge that gap. I know that if it's a titanium part, it should have some edge prep and this or that rake angle, and we can really apply that. So kind of all throughout my career here, I've always been somewhat on the application sort of side of things. For a while, it was kind of 50-50 grinding and applications. And then it turned into, they pulled me out of the grinding completely because we just had enough need for that. And I was doing all applications, tech support for quite a while. And then we officially created the tool lab, and then I've been back here ever since. So
Well, that's great. So you kind of touched on one of our questions from Adrian Imhoff. He said, being from Switzerland, he's already familiar with Fraisa, but he's interested in the imperial line management. Is the whole range of tools available, specific developments? Is there a dedicated production factory in the US? Those kinds of things. So why don't we talk
yeah.
about Fraisa USA specifically, and what you guys offer, and how much of the brand is going to migrate over to imperial sizes?
Yeah, so it's a question that we get very frequently, and with some level of frustration here and there, depending on which tool we're talking about. Fraser Switzerland is, of course, they're the headquarters. They're the ones who develop all of our tooling. They do all of the R&D. So generally speaking, the tools always come out in metric first around the April timeframe. And then October is kind of our launch time. So what we do is we look before either of those dates, we look at those and the tools that are coming out, and we kind of have to judge, is this going to be something that the US market really needs, or is this more of a highly specialized tool that maybe a couple of shops would like, but we also have some crossover that would work well. One thing that Fraisa does is a lot of very specialized tooling. For instance, we have a cutter that is specifically 100% meant for Inconel machining, and it has every possible bell and whistle on it to make sure that it cuts Inconel better than anything else. And you put it into a mild steel, and it doesn't work that well. For
Right.
whatever reason, or there are tools that work better, I should say. So like a tool like that, we have to judge, how the American market works with Inconel specifically. And in a lot of cases, from what we see, people just, because of how hard Inconel is to cut and how hard it is on the tool, people just buy the cheapest tool possible, because you could spend twice as much money on a really good tool, but only get maybe 10, 20% better of a result. So, in a case like that, we chose not to bring a tool like that in.
At
So
least in imperial sizes, you
in the
still
imperial
import them,
size,
right?
it's always available. Everything that is in the metric catalog is fully available. We stock all of the large running type tools. So we sell in the States, we sell about 50/50 inch and metric. And the stuff that we do sell in metric, we actually do keep in stock here in Minnesota. So not everything is always coming over. But if there is some random tool that we don't keep in stock here, we can bring it in. It's usually 4 to 5 days or so.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all available. But yeah, not everything gets made in inch. It's, to be honest, it's the catalog for the metric is probably 4 times the size of ours, because they have so much, and they keep things in their catalog to keep their customers happy. Tools that have been around for 20 plus years, where we're trying to create a catalog that's a little bit more lean, that covers all the bases, and maybe has like a high performance level and then a medium performance level, so 2 different price point levels for the tool.
So, are all of the imperial size tools made in the U.S.? And what's the production situation in the U.S.? How big is your department and all of that?
So right now we have 8. We use all Anka cutter grinders. We do some inch production. We do the regrinding of tools and custom tooling here. But what we're finding is that overseas we run Reinekers, Rolomatics, and then some Ankas. And what we're finding is that the more and more Fraisa tries to push the envelope and come out with new, very unique geometries, they design those tools on Reinekers are primarily our production machines overseas. So they get designed on those machines, and it's not quite the same as like a mill, where you're programming in a Mastercam or something like that, and you're bringing a G code in, and for the most part, one mill is going to copy the same thing the other type of mill, the other brand would do. The grinders are not that way. They each have, for the most part, their own proprietary software. So a Rollomatic can do certain features in a certain way, and the Anka might not be able to copy it. So, for instance, we have one tool that has an end face on it that is designed for high angle entry into parts. In a mild steel, you can helical bore in at like 20, 25 degrees and just get to the bottom fast. On our Ankas, we cannot. We've tried a lot. We cannot get it to match up exactly with what the Reinekers do. So in those cases, with a lot of these newer tools, they are, even though they are inch sizes, they're being produced in Europe, just because of the machine differences there.
Right. That makes sense.
So
Yeah. A past guest, Josh Ogle, was talking about those because he uses those a lot in
yeah,
titanium. And I think he was saying like 12-degree ramp into titanium.
yeah.
Yeah, which is just like, it's so cool.
I remember talking to him the first time he did it. He's like, I'm going to try it at 4 first. And I'll just do it. It'll be fine.
So you mentioned designing these tools, and one of the other questions we had from Obsidian Tools was how much is software and simulation versus just trial and error?
Mhm.
What goes into a cutter design?
Quite a bit. There is some trial and error, but initially the tools all get designed, in a software where we can simulate heat zones. We can simulate how the chip is going to be removed. So we can tweak flute shape. We can tweak the rake angle. We can tweak all these things and just see how it should actually affect the cut. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the actual cut. So that's why we have so many machines. We have the one here, but where it really counts over in Switzerland, where they actually do the designing, and they have 9 machines over there. There's not a lot, at least that I'm aware of. There's not a lot of cutter grinding companies that have 10 total machine CNC mills to actually test their tools. In a lot of cases, it is kind of just a let's try this helix, let's try this rake, and let's put this tool out there and get some feedback and see what happens. That's not what we do. We start typically 2 to 3 years in advance. So I know of tools right now that won't be out for 3 more years.
Oh wow.
We put that much work into it. It is, yes. And that's why you'll see every year we release a new kind of batch of tools, new tools, and for the most part, some of them are more common than others, but we're always trying to push the bar and set a new standard for what a carbide end mill can actually do. And that's why it takes 2 to 3 years to actually get this stuff figured out, because if it doesn't work perfectly, we scratch it off and we go back to the drawing board and start completely different.
Does that ever bite you guys in the ass? Like, because I would imagine that most of these are spurred on by customer demand or parts that you're seeing in the industry. Do you ever find that you're too late to market? People have already kind of adopted some other process.
Only in very rare cases, because typically what we see is that most companies, besides some other European and like Japanese type companies, they produce kind of at the status quo. They're not overly developing something completely out of the ordinary. So when we came with, like, we have a new series for roughing aluminum, and it's a completely different approach to doing it than how most people have been normally roughing their aluminum. So it wasn't like we took an idea that was already kind of being tested on the market, and then we just tried to make it a little better. We tried to completely rethink the whole process.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
in some cases, yeah, maybe a little bit, but we also try to make sure that the tool is so much better than what we had previously. Almost everything that we make, it replaces something in the catalog. We phase out an old tool or something like that. So we use the old tool as kind of our benchmark, and then of course some competitors as well. And we try to make whatever we finally produce be just that much better than
Okay,
everybody else, if we can.
and are they usually spurred on by customer demand? Does Rolex come to you and has a specific problem, and then you're like, oh, this is something that more people might have. A problem more people might have.
Yep. Yeah. So we have internally, we have a forum for every Fraisa employee. If they hear about anything, a tool that they see working well, maybe it is a competitor tool and they see it working well, we can give that feedback to our R&D department, and then they start really looking into it. Some things we've seen kind of come and go as being sort of like a gimmick in a way, where we just won't go down that route because it does not make sense. For instance, and I might get some hate for saying this, but there's a trend towards, or at least there was for a while, a trend towards using high flute count tools for dynamic roughing in like mild steels and things like that. You'd use a 6 or 7 flute tool, and people were thinking the more teeth, the faster I can go, and it'll just be better. We don't have any roughers that are more than 5 flutes, and I don't foresee that we ever will for machining those types of materials, mild steels, because what we've found is that the heat zone created, it makes more sense to have less flutes and a larger step over, which then lowers your feed rate. It makes more sense to attack it that way as opposed to, say, a 7 flute tool that has no chip evacuation, and so you have to take maybe a 5% step over at best, and you're feeding it at 300, 400 inches a minute. Well, how many machines out there can
Actually get
especially
those
like
numbers.
in corners hit that?
Yeah.
So your theoretical metal removal rate might sound high, but then you put it on the machine and it takes twice as long to cut. So we really try to look at what is realistic on the market, what machines are actually capable of doing, like that aluminum tool that I mentioned earlier. The recommended parameters for the standard end mill are 2 times D axial and an 80% radial step over.
Jeez.
And that's a complete disconnect from what everybody else does. But the way we designed the tool is with very good chip evacuation. It has through coolant and all of that, and really high polished flutes. And it's for that same type of reason. You can run that way at, say, 150 inches a minute instead of a 40% or a 20% step over at 500 inches a minute.
Right.
So you ultimately get that actual high metal removal rate.
Right. A more general purpose high removal rate. Like, a Haas could reach that
exactly.
versus like trying to, almost any machine, if you're trying to actually rough it 500-600 inches a minute, good luck,
Yeah. And that's really what we try to push, is that, I know I saw one of the questions was about the machines and that we have, but we want our tools to be usable everywhere, be useful everywhere. You see videos online a lot of people cutting at supposedly 1,200 inches a minute, 1,500 inches a minute, and it's just not realistic.
Right. Yeah, most machines aren't that dynamic.
Right.
And
then you get into a part with any sort of complexity, no machine is holding that feed rate anywhere.
Right.
Where we take the opposite approach. We want to slow things down, keep the same metal removal rates, but slow down the feed rate so that the machines can actually do it, and you end up shaving a lot of time on your parts.
Definitely. So you brought it up. Let's talk about the machine you have in the tool lab and what decision was made. Because we had questions. Do you test tools on less rigid machines? Not everybody has a Hermla sitting in their shop, as much as we all want one. And then Cody Gibson wanted to know about the purchasing experience, support, service, day-to-day operation, all that stuff.
So the Hermla is lucky, obviously, to have it. That came about just through a partnership. When we started up the tool lab here, there's not a lot of cutter grinders that are doing something like this. So they were really one of the first to kind of believe in the idea of it. So we came to them and we developed a partnership. So I can't really speak to the purchasing experience. We do pay for some of the machine for the use, for the depreciation of it and things like that, but it is not technically our actual owned machine. But that's kind of that's how the partnership game works. They have some skin in the game, and so do we.
Well, because you've had some other high end machines in the tool lab before too, right?
In our particular case, one machine that's relatively nice, a step above a Haas, is a Kern Microvario.
Just a little step. Yeah.
Totally being sarcastic there. I love the guys at Kern, so hopefully they hear that and don't get too mad.
No, Dan reached out and was like, "Oh yeah, they had a Kern in there for a while. Doug's awesome." And I was like, "Okay, yeah,
that's
pretty
we had
awesome."
The Kern. That was a scenario where they had a machine coming in. They wanted to do like an open house event, to do a few demos and things like that, and then sell it to the customer. So we kind of lucked out in that situation where we had the space for it. The Kern obviously doesn't take up much space. And I got, about 8, 9 months of getting to play with one of the best machines out there. So
That's pretty amazing.
that was the situation with the Kern. Hopefully down the road, as we expand the tool lab, maybe we can bring a Kern in for good or something else. I don't know. But right now we use the Hermley. It's a phenomenal machine, as most people know.
And it's a C22?
C22 dynamic.
Oh,
So
wow. Awesome.
it has all the high accuracy features and all of that kind of stuff. I really have honestly no complaints on it. I came from all Fanuc controlled machines, so I learned the Heidenhain whenever that machine came in, and full on Heidenhain guy now. If I were to buy a new machine for myself, it would absolutely have a Heidenhain. They're so easy to use, and for simultaneous 5-axis, they're amazing. So the Hermley in itself is a phenomenal machine, as most people know. What I love about Hermley as a company is, my experience with their applications guys. They are top notch. They send most, if not all of them, over to Germany for quite a long time to go through their apprenticeship program. We've done a fair amount of customer parts, like turnkey type parts with them, and it's their apps guys doing all of the programming. Then they hand the program over to me, and I tweak some things for Fraisa tooling. But they're very intelligent. They really know what they're doing. I've worked with a lot of apps guys, and there's a lot of good ones out there. I'm not knocking anybody else, but the Hermley team as a whole is extremely good. And as far as service goes, I did crash the spindle once. It took 2 days to replace, so that was pretty good. That was on our first machine when I was just kind of starting off on that. I don't like to talk about that too much.
I don't blame you. That hurts my gut. That it wasn't
that
my
was an
machine.
expensive replacement, but we'll move on from that. But beyond that, honestly, I haven't needed service for anything.
Okay.
Nothing else is broken down.
So to get to DFM Toolworks questions, do you guys test on less rigid machines? Because I think
sure.
a shop could get the impression from the price of the tooling and the machines you guys show that like maybe this isn't the tool for me. Maybe they don't expect me to run it on a Haas or a Brother or something like that.
Right. And I've heard that before too. I've literally heard, like, as soon as I get my Akuma, I'll start buying your stuff.
Right.
I don't want to put it on my Haas. And we definitely get that. But with the setup that we have, especially overseas, we're in Switzerland, right next to GF Machine Solutions. So it's a Swiss thing. We have, I want to say, 8 different varying levels of their machines.
Mm-hmm.
So we do test on different, spindle taper setups. And I mean, to be honest, the GF machines, they're obviously phenomenal machines, but in terms of true rigidity, they're not the most rigid machine out there.
Okay. Because I mean, back to Josh's point, like I've got a 30 taper, he's got a small HSK. Like hearing 12-degree ramp, I'm like, yeah, okay, maybe on your big boy Hermley, but like on my machine, that's not going to work. So
so it's more a matter of like what your spindle has for power and torque, what your look ahead is on your control, for instance, and there's a lot of factors that come into it. But as long as you're using a proper tool holder and have a decent setup, we have customers that run anything from basic Haas machine all the way up to a $6 million Echo Speed right down the road from us here. So the testing gets done in an environment that is high end, if you will, but the parameters that we give, like, one of the biggest selling points, in my opinion, to the Fraisa line is we have online tool expert software. And so every single cut that we do in our R&D department, all of that data gets dumped into our tool expert. It is true, like, real world data. If we start getting feedback from a customer that says this just doesn't work, which is actually pretty rare, we go through, we change all that, we adjust it to be more realistic. We don't put data out there that is right at the limit of what the tool can possibly do. because we know not everybody can push it that. In a lot of cases, the tool is not the weak link. Something
Right.
else might be. So yeah, I'm getting back to his point. Yeah, we don't have the. It's a hard question to answer because we do have less rigid machines. They are just high end machines.
Right.
You know, we have the HSK 30, 32, whatever it is, spindle taper, or the HSK 40. So we have smaller spindles. We have the obviously 63. I think one that has a 100 on it. So we try to test in all ranges, and then we do also have a partnership with a university in Switzerland where they do testing for us. We have certain customers, you know, ones that have been using Fraisa for a long time that will sort of beta test tools for us and give their opinions on them that have completely different machine types. So we really try to, you know, get the tool in the hands of as many people as we can to get the best data possible.
Okay. Well, maybe this is a good time then to talk about your trial tool program, because I know that's on your bio on Instagram.
Yep.
It is a big ask. Like when I'm looking at the Fraser catalog and I'm like, oh, that end mill's 3x what I normally pay for
Sure.
a 3/8 inch end mill. How can somebody go about testing one of those and having you prove to them that it's worth the price?
So really all that we ask is just to know what you're going to do with it. Otherwise, assuming everything makes sense, and you know, we will help the person pick out the best possible tool. I'll help in any way I can with if they have questions on programming it, you know, the best way to actually put toolpath on there. We'll give as much support as they possibly want or need. Sometimes people don't want any support. They just want to plug that tool in and run it. But our test tool policy is anything that's 1/2 inch, 12 millimeter and under is just free, no questions asked.
Okay, great. And then who should they
Unless,
reach out to?
yeah, to reach out, tech support at fraisausa.com
Okay.
is the easiest one. You can call the office and you'll get routed to me, and then I'll answer from there too. But tech support at fraisausa.com is where all of that really should come, and then we'll help pick out a tool and get people moving. If it's anything bigger than the 12 millimeter side, well, usually what we do is just a guaranteed test.
Okay.
If it works, you buy it. If it doesn't work, then you're out nothing.
Right. I think that's totally fair. Totally.
So, and there are some, you know, kind of stipulations, if you will. You know, we do want a halfway decent tool holder. You know, we want to make sure that your coolant is, you know, actually hitting the tool, stuff like that. And
right. Yeah.
you know, it can't be a totally garbage setup and pray that the tool works.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I can only imagine you've had some people like, oh, you mean I can't run 80% step over with no coolant and
Oh
this
yeah,
terrible holder that from 40 years ago?
right. We hear all the time, especially like shrink fit holders. They come back and this tool keeps breaking. I've broke like 5 tools, and I'm asking you, did you replace the holder after break number 1? Well, no. Look at the inside of your holder. There's a massive burr on the inside, just
Right.
pinching that tool off and snapping it.
Ugh.
So yeah, we've heard all sorts. So
Let's see. Another question we had from Kitty Masterworks was, what's the rough cost difference in the same size tool at different micrograins, and how does the grain size affect performance?
So from the cost standpoint, there really is no difference. There is a mild amount of difference on our end, but you're talking a few dollars between the different carbide grades that we use. All of the grades that we use are micrograin or sub micrograin. Usually they're, what are they, 8 or 9-ish% cobalt. And really what we do though, in terms of picking out what grade to use, it's all about the application. It's all about the tool type, the material that we intend to use it in, and you know how the tool is going to get used. So carbide is like a metal, like anything else. It has some bend to it before it gives. You know, it's extremely rigid for what it is, but you can bend carbide just like you can bend a steel rod. So if we are, for instance, that roughing tool, taking that 80% step over, it's taking a lot of side load. It could be going, smashing into 1/4, 90 degrees and moving. So we use a carbide grade that has more forgiveness to it. It has more bend before it actually breaks. Whereas you don't want a grade like that in a high precision ball nose tool. If you're trying to hold, one of our ball nose tools goes down to a plus or minus 3 micron form tolerance. You don't want to have a carbide grade that's bending while you're trying to finish your 60 Rockwell D2 insert. So with those types of tools, we use a more rigid grade carbide that can withstand the high hardnesses better. And then we have sort of our mid-level grade, which would be kind of in between the two. And that's for the vast majority of our tooling, just more general purpose carbide. A good amount of forgiveness to it in case you are roughing, but enough rigidity there for if you need to do a finish pass.
Okay, great. And then I had a few questions that kind of came up last night when I was thinking about the episode. So, strictly speaking of cutter geometry, what features on a tool directly correlate to improved finishes and then directly correlate to improved tool life?
Sure. So finishes in terms of sidewall type finishing, and this, we could be here for another 3 hours on this topic, but we have one tool in particular called our multi-cut XF. It's one of those tools that a customer sees it, it kind of blows their mind the first time they see it, and then blows their mind even more when they actually use it. It has a normal tool is about a 45-degree helix. This tool has a 65-degree helix, so it looks like a ball screw. That's what everybody always says.
Those were actually my first introduction to Fraisa
Okay.
years and years ago. At like my first job, we were doing these 17.4 pieces, and one of the machinists I worked with was like an ex tool maker, and was like, "Oh, I know of these really high end finishers," sure. and he grabbed some of those, and like we couldn't believe, 2-inch length of cut on a 1/2-inch end mill in 17.4, and it was quiet and amazing.
Yes, so the idea behind that is with that high helix, what it's doing is, rather than when you have a lower helix, you have more surface area contact every time that flute comes and swipes through. So you get more deflection because of that. But in roughing and all of that, you want that lower helix because you need to get the chip out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as important. When it comes to finishing, that high helix is actually grabbing and pulling that tool straight down. And what that does is you end up with walls that are completely straight or extremely straight. And then it also really stabilizes the tool because you always have that constant Z down pressure. Those tools are also variable index, so it cuts down on some of that vibration. But I run those tools into on-size corners all the time, and you get no chatter in the corner at all. So with a square tool, like for steels, titaniums, things like that, that's going to be the most important thing. When it comes to aluminum, there's a lot of different factors. It can be, on a lot of our tools, we do wipers. So the end face will have that 0 angle, like little patch of grind. And right. What that does is basically polishes the aluminum as it goes. And on the OD
you've got
of the tool,
you've got that going all the way up on some of your aluminum tools. I know the 3/8 that I just bought, I want to say Jules said that there was a little 0 relief patch all the way up the flute.
Yep. So what we do with those tools, we actually, instead of doing a true OD grind, which gives you like, a straight angled edge, we cylindrically grind the tool first, and then we put it in the Anka and do all the rest of the grinds. So there's a little sliver, about less than 1/4 of an inch, 100 micron or so, of actually cylindrically ground area on that tool. And then what that does, the exact same thing as having a wiper there, where it burnishes or polishes the aluminum as it cuts. So for those types of things, that it's more geometrical. When it comes to like a ball nose tool, what we'll do is we have we have an O-Tech drag finishing machine. So we'll put hones on the edges. We have a polishing media. So after they come back from coating, we'll polish the tool to make sure any high spots are taken out, and the coating is as smooth as it can possibly be. So that's typically what gets done with the ball nose.
Okay. And then what about improved tool life? What kind of features can you guys add or do you guys add to improve tool life?
Sure. So in the roughing side of things, that's where the O-Tech comes in. If you've ever run a tool that does not have an edge prep on it, which we're not the only ones doing edge prep, plenty of companies do that. But if you run one that doesn't have that, typically what happens is right when you get in the cut, you'll hear kind of a little bit of a squeal. It just doesn't quite sound right. You'll run it for maybe 15, 20 minutes and it breaks itself in. And then it runs great for a while, and then you're done.
I think we've all run tools like that where you're
Exactly.
like, oh yeah, it's just squealing right off the bat. It's okay. It'll be fine.
Just give it a minute. It'll be okay. So what the O-Tech is, the theory behind that is that we are breaking in the tool in a controlled environment for the customer. So we're rounding that edge, that cutting edge off. If you look at the cutting edge of a tool straight off of a grinder, under heavy magnification, it looks like a sawtooth because you have two different angles of grind coming together at a pointed surface. It's not like it's this beautiful, perfect edge. So
right.
In order to kind of improve on that, make that a little bit better, we do that drag finishing and kind of round that corner off.
Okay, great. And then the other question I had was, what's the coolest catalog tool Fraisa makes? So not like a concept tool, but
Sure.
Something that you find very unique or cool, or just something like that's your go-to, like, hey, look at what we can do.
So I would say I have a couple of answers for that. In terms of the cool factor, we have our whole series of conical barrel tools. We call them the R-Cut X series. That's something that's becoming more and more popular. They're kind of difficult to use in terms of programming. You have to have the right cam system to do it. Hypermill is extremely good at doing that for sure. That's who we partner with. That's who we partnered with to actually create our family of tools initially. Okay. So we have a very good relationship with them.
Does that line include all of those styles? So like a barrel, lens. I think there's a third one too.
So there's a conical barrel. There's a standard barrel. There's a lens. What we chose to do is only do conical styles.
Okay.
Because what ends up happening with anything else, except for maybe a lens, I kind of wish we had a lens, quite honestly, but maybe that'll be in my request to the Swiss. We have, to cover the lens areas, we have it's a true conical barrel tool, but rather than looking more like a cone, it has a really, really steep angle on it. So you're only tilting your tool off like maybe 15 degrees off of perpendicular.
Oh, okay.
Whereas a normal conical barrel tool, you would be tilting, we'll say 70 degrees off of perpendicular. Then with the other tools, like with a standard barrel tool, you really only have a very small window of actual usable area, because since they don't have the cone built into it, that radius goes tangent into the shank. So the further you go up to that radius, the closer and closer you're going to get to your holder. Eventually you'd hit. So it's a very small window there. So we went only with the conical style. We just saw the most benefit to that, and it's paid off some. We have a lot of customers in kind of the mold industry where they're finishing these. We had one recently that was a bundt cake mold out of aluminum.
Okay.
And he was ball nose finishing it. I think it was like 14 to 18 hours of ball nose surface finishing all the way down. And we gave him a conical barrel tool, and he had it down to like 2.5, 3 hours.
Oh man.
So
talk about night and day.
They were ecstatic with that. But they have their place. You know, a lot of people ask about them and they want to use them, and come to find out there's some feature, some angle that it just doesn't work. So they're they're cool, they're useful, but they take a lot to get into and use effectively. But really, I think right now the coolest tool that we have that was just released, it was released last April. We call it our NX
The
floor
floor
finisher.
finisher. Yeah. That
Yeah.
thing is really neat.
So that's something that I spoke earlier about. We're always trying to push the bar. That tool was in development for 2 years. Nobody else has anything like it. They have them in true diamond fashion. Where you get those really good finishes. But this is a solid carbide end mill with a standard PV coating. And what we did, it's a 4-flute tool. But if you look at it, it has the spacing of 3 of the flutes are like a 3-flute tool, and then we kind of shoved that 4th flute in between 2 of them. And what it did was 3 of those teeth are offset downward axially and slightly inward radially, so by about 100 micron. And those three flutes are the kind of supporting pre-finishing flutes. And then the 4th flute is designed with a full like wiper, just this really smooth transition on that flute to come in and really just polish everything out. And I've used that tool here in D2 heat treated, H13, 55 Rockwell, 304 stainless, titanium, just about anything. And I'm seeing results in like the best I've ever gotten is a 1.6 RA. Typically, they're all in about the 2 to 3 at least RA finish on them.
That's
So
crazy.
that was a pretty cool one. Something that's completely random. I don't, as far as I'm aware, nobody else has anything like that.
I mean, it looks like a mistake. Like you see the
It
picture
does.
of it and you're like, oops, somebody screwed that program
Somebody
up.
put too many flutes in there.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's my personal favorite tool right now. But again, that's another tool that really is it's purpose driven. We've had a lot of interest in it and a lot of requests for it. But then you start to talk to people and they say, okay, yeah, I need to get a 10 RA on my floor. Well, we have lots of tools that can give you a 10 RA. These are for the guys that have to go that step further. A lot of mold guys, for instance, that polish everything out.
Mm-hmm.
The better RA they can get with an end mill, the less polishing they have to do.
Totally.
So we're finding that there's a narrower market for that tool, but it's still it's a great talking point for sure.
Oh yeah. Well,
And
I'll go
it
for it.
really does show, in my mind, it kind of shows what Fraisa does. That year after year, trying to sort of to reinvent what a carbide end mill is capable of doing.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, well, that brings us on to the new things area of the podcast anyway. So is there any other tools that you're excited about that Fraisa has released?
Already released or coming?
Well, if there's anything you can talk about that's coming, I'm for sure would love to hear about that.
I know of a few things that hopefully I don't get a call from Switzerland, but so right now we have a couple of series, both in the aluminum line and the general purpose line, that they cut up to 5.2 times D length to diameter ratio in a full dynamic cut, and they actually do it shockingly well. It's a little terrifying the first time you do it, but it does work well. And in the R&D department right now, what I'm hearing is that they're pushing it up to 8 times D. So it'll be full 8 times D dynamic milling.
That's terrifying.
I haven't seen it yet. I hear that's on the horizon. So
it's like 4 inches deep with a 1/2 inch end mill. And it's just full. That's wow.
Yep.
Well, I hope to see those. That I want to see some videos because that sounds insane.
Yep. I think we might be releasing it in April. I'm not 100% sure on that, but And then on the side of inch tooling and the Fraser USA market, what I'm most excited about is that we are kind of finally really aligning ourselves with the European catalog. We have some leadership in Switzerland now that really understands, or at least is attempting to actively understand, the American market really well, and listening to what we need and what we want. We have a lot of tools in our older catalogs that are tools that Fraser USA designed, because we were getting requests for tools to do certain things, and rather than having them go through their 2-year process of coming out with something new, we just designed some tools, and they ended up working really well. A lot of people, or anybody that knows Fraser, has potentially probably tried the NBNVD tool. It's a very, very good general purpose tool. That one was completely designed here at Fraser USA. But the problem with that, if you get into the online side, the technical side of what we do, the Fraser Tool Expert is an extremely powerful resource. Tons of data, 10,000 plus material types in there to choose from.
It's
And
almost a bit overwhelming.
it
I'll
is
say.
overwhelming. Yes.
Yeah.
You really have to use it a lot to kind of just get used to what you're looking for. But there's just so much there, and it's incredibly powerful. The downside to that is, because since we have a lot of these tools that we developed here, they're not implemented fully in that system, because that's a system built and driven in Switzerland. So over the next 2 to 3 catalog cycles, we're phasing out a lot of those tools and really aligning ourselves spot on with what Fraser Switzerland offers, and they're very receptive to what we need over here. That way we have everything. We have the CAD models, we have tool data in the tool expert. Our tool expert has a direct link to Hypermill, so you can pull everything in and have all of your data there. So all of that stuff will be available for the inch line as well.
Awesome. Yeah, because I know, like, looking at Phrase's lineup, that not having some of them in inch sizes makes it a tough transition. Because, like,
Yes.
for like, I use a lot of 3/8 tooling, and I would gladly switch to like a 9 millimeter, but it seems like
Yeah.
everything's 8 or 10, and it's like,
Right.
I don't want to lose 60 thou of diameter. I'll lose 25 and be
Sure.
okay, but like, I can't step up to a 10 because, like, I'm going into a 3/8 corner or something like that. So yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that it's expanding and kind of becoming more unified.
Yeah, and one of the new lines that we did release in October, we call the E-Cut series. That's probably another actually really exciting thing for Fraser USA, an actual line that is available to buy now, where we had focused for so long on the absolute top tier tools, the random one for the ZX, the barrel tools, and all of these things that are really pushing the limits. We needed to really upgrade our sort of mid-level series. So that's what this E-Cut did. And, it's offered in standard length, mid-length, 5.2 times D, 4 and 5 flute versions, dedicated matching finishing tools that are actually not quite as good as the Multicut XF, but extremely good for a general purpose finisher. And then they come in at a very good price point. That was one of the biggest things I did over the last year, was research all of the American market's sort of general purpose tools and make sure that these tools fell right into that sort of price band.
Awesome.
So that way we're not avoiding the phrase stigma of being too expensive.
Right.
So that way
Yeah.
the guy that thinks he shouldn't use the Fraser tool because he has a Haas or whatever it is, these E-Cuts give him something to use, and they're an extremely good tool. We actually found a new way of dressing our grinding wheels so that we're actually able to put on multiple features at the same time. So instead of using one wheel to flute the tool and one wheel to do the OD, we were able to dress these wheels to kind of combine some things. So it cut down on our cycle time by a lot. So then we were able to drop the price on the tools by a lot.
Awesome. That's great. Well, that brings me to the last question I ask every guest. And this doesn't have to be Fraisa related, but I always ask, what did you research this week? Because it's always really cool to hear what people in the industry, I've had people talk about video games or baby stuff, or, what has been popping up in Google for you often and that you're in your spare time trying to figure out.
Well, I very generously bought my 3 young daughters a 3D printer for Christmas. It was totally for them, I swear, not for me at all.
Oh yeah.
So I got a cheap Creality, the Ender 5 Pro. So that's been my thing every time I go home. Just
very cool.
Printing toys. So I do make them stuff at least. But yeah, that's been my latest venture.
That's great. Yeah, I've got a Ender 3 sitting on the shelf just above me, and got some resin printers at the shop, and I'm currently, I don't know, 60% of the way through acquiring all the stuff for a Voron 3D printer, which is another Core XY printer. But yeah, they're great. Like, it's a ton of fun, and
I love it. Yeah,
we use them a ton at the shop for, like all my college storage was printed on my printer, little things like that. Yeah, it might take a long time on the printer, but it does it while I sleep. So like,
you don't care.
Yeah. You just wake up.
I see that more and more. Just like you were saying, I see that. I visit shops. Yesterday I was down in Chicago visiting Fast Radius. They actually do some pretty crazy 3D printing there. But I see that more and more at any shop where they have a few sitting around and they're printing their fixtures, and like you said, they college storage and stuff like that. So yeah, they have their place and they're easy to use. So
exactly, yeah. Oh well, like, I don't know if you've seen Alton on Instagram, but like, he prints a lot of packaging with them, like to go to plating and things like that. Why struggle through like plastic bags and paper when you can just like print bespoke,
make a nice looking.
Yeah, so
that's the way to go.
I think that, so many people when they first came out were like, oh, this is going to take my job. And it's like, no, it's just going to make your job easier. Like, it's going to be so much better.
Yep. And we work with, we have Matsura right down the road from us up here. And they have their Lumex machine, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. That's all metal printing. And even on all of that, we supply a lot of the carbide tooling for that, because they come in, they print a layer, and then they mill the fine features that have to have that really good surface finish or tight tolerance, things like that. And same thing, even talking to the guys at Fast Radius, they can do some just insane prints with the machines that they have. They're some of the best machines out there, but they still have to come over to their milling department to have tight tolerance bores done, or really good surface finishes, things like that.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, well, and like, I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, what about casting houses? And it's like, castings have become incredibly hard to get, and still have like, what, a 40-week lead time? It's like, we need parts tomorrow. Like, I can't do that. So yeah, it's all for the good, I think, definitely.
I think so too. I'm less and less concerned about it taking our job away, at least not anytime soon.
Right, exactly. Well, Doug, I really appreciate you taking the time. It's been great getting to kind of dive more into the Fraisa brand and what you guys do and where you're focused and all of that. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, this has been awesome.
And real quick before we close, Patreon thank yous. No new ones this week, but thank you all for backing the podcast. It lets me take the time and interview people like Doug and learn about awesome brands. So thank you all. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.